Allan Pinkerton had no idea what he was getting himself into when he first came upon a group of counterfeiters just outside of Chicago. After taking down the criminals, he would leave his business behind to become a detective, going on to start his own agency with his brother, calling it the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. They would take on extremely high-profile cases, from hunting Jesse James to stopping an attempt on Abraham Lincoln's life. But as the agency grew far larger than they ever could have hoped for, eventually surpassing the total standing US Army in size, they began to find themselves in one controversy after another, putting down groups of striking workers in fights that often left many dead and wounded. But the company persisted and still operates to this day. This is the story of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, and this is Learn Something New. Born in Scotland in 1819, Allan Pinkerton grew up to become a barrel maker. But before long, he became an active member in the country's Chartist movement, essentially a movement where the laborers of the Industrial Revolution were fighting for workers' rights. After sending a petition to Parliament with over 1.25 million signatures in 1839, British authorities began to crack down on the Chartists, and Pinkerton had to flee from Scotland, moving to the United States, specifically Illinois, in 1842, opening up a cooperage where he made barrels for the local community. 5 years later, in 1847, Pinkerton was making his usual trip into the nearby forest to look for wood best suited for barrel making. As he made his way across an island in the Fox River, he came across a group of people counterfeiting fake coins. The moment he realized what they were doing, he ran back to town, telling the local sheriff, who then went back to the island with Pinkerton and arrested the counterfeiters. Word about this arrest got out quickly, and Pinkerton became a local hero overnight. But now, people were calling upon him for more than barrels, with Pinkerton writing, "I suddenly found myself called upon from every quarter to undertake matters requiring the detective's skill." These local businesses figured if there was a mystery to be solved, who better to ask than the local hero? Pinkerton leaned into this, leaving barrels behind and becoming a sheriff's deputy in the Kane and Cook counties of Illinois. After just a few years, he would go on to become Chicago's first police department detective, and just a few months later, he would partner with a local attorney, Edward Rucker, to create the Northwestern Police Agency, acting as a local detective agency to help police solve crimes. Meanwhile, Allan's brother, Robert Pinkerton, had created a business of his own back in 1843 called Pinkerton & Co. Pinkerton & Co. operated as a railroad contractor in the Midwest, but Robert quickly saw that there was a lot of competition in the railroad construction business, but also a lot of unsolved railroad crimes taking place. It was extremely common for trains to get robbed of both their cargo and passengers' valuables. This led Robert to team up with Allan, who subsequently shut down the Northwestern Police Agency and went all in with his brother on the new company, the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, providing detective services, security guards, and even some military work for the right price. But their main mission at the start was catching counterfeiters and stopping train robbers. The Pinkerton Agency quickly garnered a reputation for setting fair fees and handling themselves in a respectable way that gave them the perception of the go-to detectives if you wanted a job done right. And their popularity would only grow, as in 1861, in the midst of an investigation, they would discover a plot to assassinate the newly elected president, Abraham Lincoln, while he was en route to his inauguration. The Pinkertons quickly sent word to Lincoln, who promptly changed his itinerary. No attempt on the president's life was made on that trip. And the Pinkertons' reputation as effective detectives only grew. The interaction had sat well enough with the federal government that when the Civil War kicked off, they were hired in two different capacities. One was to occasionally act as the president's bodyguard, protecting him from any would-be assassins, while the second was to send detectives as quasi-spies into Confederate territory to see if they could learn anything about their operations or plans. After the Civil War ended, the Pinkerton National Detective Agency set up their headquarters in Chicago, Illinois, with a large eye painted onto the side, along with their tagline, "We never sleep." The eye, which served as the Pinkerton logo, gave way to the origin of the term private eye. They also went back to their regular cases, mainly stopping train robberies, but Allan Pinkerton began to take on a project that would lay the framework for the future FBI's database. As the detective agency brought in more criminals, Allan realized that a lot of these robbing gangs consisted of the same people, who would serve their time in prison for their crimes, then get out and go back to the same criminal activities. Taking a more proactive approach, the agency began to take down criminal information once they were captured, taking their pictures, noting associates and crimes committed. By the early 1870s, this had grown into the world's largest collection of mugshots. However, despite entering into the golden age of the company, it wasn't all smooth sailing. In 1871, when Chicago suffered its Great Fire on the night of October 7th, their headquarters went up in flames, along with many other buildings within the city. This destroyed many of the files the Pinkertons had been acquiring. As the flames were put out, the agency was hired to stand guard and prevent any looting. They would begin rebuilding their company immediately, but they certainly weren't hurting for clients. In fact, they were more popular than ever, going after the infamous Frank and Jesse James during this time, but now they were also seeing more cases brought on by rich robber barons who were looking to put down groups of striking factory workers, the most notable of which was in the 1892 Homestead Mill strike, when the Carnegie Steel Corporation hired around 300 of the Pinkerton guards to be stationed at the steel mill in Homestead, Pennsylvania. When the striking workers came to protest their working conditions and wages, fighting broke out, lasting the entire day, with weapons ranging from guns to sticks of dynamite. The workers, numbering in the thousands, eventually wore down the far fewer Pinkertons who surrendered. Dozens had perished in the fighting, but many more were wounded. Public outcry labeling the Pinkertons as thugs for hire led to several states banning their use in labor disputes. They still had people hiring them for other cases, however, and the number of employees within the company still grew. By the 1890s, with over 2,000 detectives and 30,000 people in reserve to assist investigations as needed, the Pinkertons employed more men than in the standing US Army at the time, leading to places like the state of Ohio to outlaw Pinkertons from their territory for fear of paramilitary usage. But eventually, the need for a private group of detectives such as the Pinkertons began to dissipate. President Lincoln created the Secret Service to act as the federal arm cracking down on counterfeiters. The organization that would become the FBI was created in 1908, utilizing their national database to take on many of the prevailing gangs and criminal organizations across the country. And local police forces were able to gain a foothold within their own communities, able to keep the peace without needing outside hires. The Pinkertons were beginning to be seen as unnecessary and potentially unethical, given their reputation, including that of occasionally taking out innocent civilians during their investigations, with the United Labor Party in New Jersey stating, "Pinkerton men go from state to state committing murders for which none of them are ever brought to trial." As the decades passed and the Pinkertons, once widely known, faded into obscurity, they took on more private security jobs, eventually being acquired by a Swedish security company, still operating today with around 50,000 employees worldwide. Thank you for watching Learn Something New. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Or if you want, you can check out the channel's Patreon, linked below in the description. Special thanks to the channel's patrons, but as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.